Hi there! In this video I will talk about spinal articulation, which is an important and advanced skill to overcome pain. And I'm talking about pain by the neck, by the suboccipital area, so it can also help with tension headaches. Definitely pain by the shoulder blades, by the mid-back, addressing low back pain, SI joint issues, hip pain, hip issues, some pelvic floor issues, and can also help with some cases of knee pain. So by understanding this one skill and by practicing these exercises, you can actually overcome a lot of issues. In this video, I will go over exercises face up, face down, and on all fours. And I would perform these exercises, this routine, 3 times a week, and I would do 10 of each exercises. And I would only progress once I'm able to perform these easily. Some of these are more challenging than others, so some may take a couple weeks or even a couple months to be able to do them easily. The first exercise is the Chintak, which is also called capital flexion, because capitis, and we're going into a flexion, or craniocervical flexion in more fancy terms. Basically, we are keeping our head on the mat and we're bringing our nose to the sternum without lifting our head, and the chest stays open. So the exercise looks like this. You're going to curl your nose down, keeping the head on the mat, coming into a capital flexion, strengthening the flexors, lengthening the extensors of the neck, and then coming back into neutral. I'm just gonna do 3 of these exercises just to keep the video short, but as I said, I think it's worth if you do 10 of these. And just bringing back to neutral. And again, keep the head on the mat, slide the nose down towards the sternum, keep the chest open. This is really good for neck pain and also tension headaches. The next exercise is lifting the head and curling up till your shoulder blades lift off the mat, and then unfurling back to the mat. With this, we begin the articulation of the spine. We are going into lifting the head, going into flexion, articulating the spine, touching down bone by bone, holding the head, and then unfurling back to the mat. And then one more, lifting the head. With that, the SCM kicks in, and then capital flexion, cervical flexion, and the beginning of the thoracic flexion. You can also hold it here and then take the time unfurling back to the mat, reaching each bone down at a time. So also focusing on the eccentric phase of the exercise. The next one is sitting up all the way. So you will need to bring your feet a little bit more forward. Keep the heel, the ball of the feet, and the toes down. And as you're curling all the way up, don't let your foot lift up, because that means that you are also using your hip flexor. So everything is anchored, the butt is down evenly. You can have your arms out in front, or you can have your arms by your side. And building on the previous exercises, lift the head, curl the nose forward towards the sternum, and articulate the spine up bone by bone. And then curl up all the way. Sit evenly on the sit bones, look straight ahead. You can also sit up taller here. And then curling initially the pelvis. Control the movement. And then articulating the spine down bone by bone. And then unfurling the head back to the mat. Head lift and articulating the spine, slow and controlled. If you feel that one spot is sticky, where you have a harder time, that segment, you can also play there. Just go back and forth a couple times and see if that helps with mobility. These are not easy, so they may take a couple of weeks or months to build up to, but it's definitely a good challenge. Next one, articulating the spine from the other end, from the butt towards the head. Initially starting with pelvic tilts. I've spoken about in a previous video about pelvic clock. That's also a good video to go back to and revisit and practice. So if you haven't watched it, then the idea there is that we're keeping a neutral tilt in the lumbar spine. The sit bone is down, anchored. The heel, the ball of the feet, and the toes are anchored. And we are rocking the pelvis back and front. The thigh bones are in space hold. Just the pelvis moves forward and back over the femur. And this is really good for pelvic floor issues. This is really good for hip issues, and definitely low back pain. And it's initially kind of hard to be able to touch the pelvis down, to be able to touch L5 and L4 down, but with practice, it will definitely get, the exercise definitely will get easier. This is what the bridge also looks like, and this is what the bridge also builds on, rocking the pelvis from neutral into a posterior tilt, so bringing the pelvis completely on the mat, and then keeping the knees in line with the hip, with the shoulders, and then curling the sit bones towards the knees, coming into an articulated bridge, lifting up the butt bone by bone. Keeping the tension on the hamstrings, coming up all the way, a line from the knees to the shoulder, and then rolling down bone by bone, keeping the tension in the hamstrings, touching down the lumbar vertebrae, ensuring that L2, L3, L4, L5 touches down, and then the pelvis arrives, coming into from a posterior tilt to a neutral tilt, and into finishing up into a deep anterior tilt. So with this, you may feel a lot of stretch in the low back and also by the sit bones. Let's do two more. Coming from an anterior tilt, a big mouse house, into a neutral alignment, into a posterior tilt, and then lifting up the butt vertebrae by vertebrae, curling the sit bones towards the knee, so keeping the tension on the hamstrings. Pay attention that your heels are down, the ball of the feet down, and the toes are also anchored, and the knees in line with the hips and shoulders. Come all the way up, and then curl down, slow and controlled, bone by bone, keeping the tension in the hamstrings. And once the pelvis lands, release the hamstrings, neutral tilt, big anterior tilt. Stretch by the sit bones, stretch in the hip, stretch by the low back. Face down spinal articulations are also super important because we have such a forward lifestyle, and we tend to be really weak in our back muscles. So the next following three exercises will definitely help to mobilize the spine into extension, improve our extension, and also help strengthen the back muscles. The first exercise is having your arms by your side and your nose would point down. You can have your nose all the way down. I'm not putting my head on the mat because then you wouldn't hear me speaking. But the goal is to have, coming from a cervical neutral into a cervical extension, come up as high as you can, just your head, and then bringing your head back down. With this, we stretching the flexors and strengthening the extensors. And again, I would do 10 of these and practice them till you feel your neck is getting stronger. If you feel that your shoulder blades are in the way, you can also squeeze your shoulder blades together or squeeze your shoulder blades down. Imagine that you're bringing them into your back pocket. So just extending the head and then extending the neck. Look as high as you can and then bringing your head back down to neutral. Next one is baby swan or baby cobra. The goal here too, building on the previous one, having your arms by your side and coming back into an extension. So lifting the head and not stopping by the neck, but you're coming into also a thoracic extension. Come up as high as you can and then lower down slow and controlled, vertebrae by vertebrae. And then lastly, the head comes back down. Head initiates the movement, neck follows, and then the mid-back follows. These are really good for mid-back pain, neck pain, and pain by the shoulder blades, the pain by the rhomboids. And these also are not easy exercises. The head comes down back last. Next one is full extension or swan. So with this, we're lifting the head, lifting the neck, lifting the thoracic, and then lifting also the lumbar off the mat. If you can straighten your arm on the way, and then coming down slow and controlled. The belly, to the ribs, to the breast, sternum, neck, and head comes down last. And here too, if you feel pinching in the low back, then you have to learn to curl the pelvis back on the femur. So it also stretching the psoas. Lift the head, lift the neck, lift the thorax, lift the lumbar, and then curl the pelvis back over the femur. This feels very good. And then come down slow and controlled. The exercises are slow, but the slowness also serves a purpose, right? You're holding yourself against gravity, so also focuses on eccentric phase of the movement, which is important for rehab. And lastly, spinal articulation on all fours. Also an important exercise, and it's a fun to play with. The goal here is to keep the knees, the feet, the hands, and the hips in line. And the movement starts with curling the pelvis towards the knee, so bringing the sit bones closer to the knees. That brings us into lumbar flexion. Building on it, going into thoracic flexion, cervical flexion, and capital flexion if you have it. Holding this and then going into capital extension, starting the movement with the head, cervical extension. The shoulder blades are not moving, the spine is the one that's moving. Thoracic extension, and lastly, lumbar extension, moving the sit bones towards the ceiling. Holding everything in extension and then going back into flexion, bringing the pelvis into the sit bones towards the knees, lumbar flexion into thoracic flexion, into cervical flexion, and capital flexion. Capital extension to cervical extension, thoracic extension, and then lumbar extension. And that's it. I hope this all makes sense. Spinal articulation is bringing the bones of the vertebrae down on the mat, slow and controlled. With that, we strengthening deep spinal stabilizers, also mobilizing the vertebrae. Important to help overcome pain. Hope this all makes sense. Thank you.